Montana Territory, June 1883. The sun was just breaking over the Bitterroot Mountains when Quillan West rode into the clearing and saw the woman kneeling by a stream, rinsing blood from her hands like she could scrub away whatever had happened. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, dark mud clinging to the hem. Her face stayed turned, hair veiling it, but her hands strong, shaking. Scraped raw told him more than words ever could. He shifted in the saddle, boots creaking. "Miss, you all right?" She froze, shoulders rigid. Then slowly, she turned her head. Her eyes, wide and brown, locked on him under a mess of tangled dark hair. A streak of dried blood cut across her cheekbone. She did not answer. She only stared. "I ain't here to harm you," Quillan said, voice calm. He dismounted, keeping distance. "Name's Quillan West. I got a cabin up that ridge." The woman blinked like she had not heard a human voice in days. I did not know where else to go," she whispered. "What happened?" he asked. She looked away. "They found me," she said, voice cracking. Again. Quillan crouched down, careful not to spook her. "Who's they?" She shook her head, hugging herself. "It does not matter. They are gone now. Just, please don't make me go back." He studied her. She was no older than 25. Not a settler's wife he would have known if a husband was missing a woman up here. There was something about the way she sat, back hunched like she expected someone to strike her. She was hiding, and not just from whoever had hurt her. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated. "Fara," she said. "Fara Nells." He nodded. "You got folks?" "No," her eyes dropped. Just me." He stood, offered his hand. "Come on. You're bleeding. You need rest." Fara did not move. "They said everyone knew, that the whole town saw, that I was..." Her throat closed. Quillan's hand stayed outstretched. "I do not care what they said. I got no use for gossip. You want a place to breathe. I can give you that." She looked at his hand like it might burn her. Then, slowly, she reached out and took it. The cabin was one room, wood-framed, with a stone hearth and a rough table he had built himself. Fara sat on a stool near the fire while Quillan carefully wrapped her hand in clean cloth. "You stitched this skirt yourself?" he asked, nodding to the uneven hem. She glanced down. "I had to. Mine were burned when I ran." He did not ask from where. "Not yet." "I can help with chores," she said suddenly. "I clean, I cook, and I can sew better than this, I swear it." "I ain't asking anything from you," he said. "You need a place to heal. That's it." Her lips parted, then closed. She looked back at the fire. "No one ever gave me anything without asking something back." "Well, I ain't no one." Later that night, she asked, "Why did you help me?" Quillan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Because you looked like you needed it. And because I know what it's like to need a place to hide." She tilted her head. "You," he nodded, "was not always a cowboy. Used to run whiskey through the hills. Got in deep with the wrong men. Took years to pull myself out." She studied him for a long time. "You do not look like a man with regrets." "I carry them quiet," he said. She smiled faintly. The days passed slow and steady. Quillan worked the land, and Fara helped where she could. She was cautious at first, keeping her face turned when he looked at her, but over time, she started to lift her head. One afternoon, he found her standing outside the cabin, staring at the mountains. "You never asked what happened," she said. "I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." Fara nodded. "I was a seamstress in Cressfield. I worked for the church women. One of the deacons, he started coming in when no one else was there. Said I owed him for the work. One night, he tried to take what he thought he was owed." Quillan's jaw tightened. "I fought him," she said. "Left a mark on his face. Next morning, he told everyone I'd made it up. that I'd tempted him, that I was unclean. Her voice broke, and she turned her face away. They dragged me out of the shop, spat on me, called me names I won't repeat. I ran, ended up in the woods, starving. I thought maybe the bears would finish what they started. But you found me. Quillan stepped closer. You did not deserve any of that. I still hear them, she whispered. See the way they looked at me. Like I was filth. He reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. You are not. Tears welled up in her eyes. She looked down, ashamed again. Look at me, he said. She hesitated. Fara, please. She raised her face, slowly. You are strong, he said. And you are still here. That counts for everything. The tears spilled then. She covered her face, shaking. Quillan pulled her into his arms, and she clung to him like the world might disappear if she let go. They fell into a rhythm. Fara started laughing again, soft at first, then louder. She stitched new curtains for the cabin and baked bread that made Quillan linger at the table longer than he meant to. He taught her how to saddle a horse. She taught him how to hem his own shirts properly. And then, one night, under the stars, she said, You make it feel like I am not broken. He took her hand. You are not broken, Fara. You are whole. Always were. She leaned in and kissed him, trembling, and he kissed her back, steady. By the end of July, word reached them that the deacon from Crestfield had been run out by another woman's accusation. The town had turned on him. Fara listened quietly. I should go back, she said. Face them. You do not owe them anything, Quillan said. No, she said, but I owe it to myself. He looked at her. Then I will ride with you. They rode into Crestfield side by side. People stared. Fara's breath caught as they entered the square. She slowed her horse. I cannot. Quillan reached down and took her hand. And then, just like that, he dismounted, came around, and held her hand as she stepped down beside him. She started to turn her face away, but he gently lifted her chin. Hold your head high, he said. You have nothing to be ashamed of. She nodded, tears in her eyes, and walked with him, hand in his, through the center of town. People watched. Some whispered. Some looked down, ashamed of their own cruelty. But Fara did not lower her gaze. And Quillan never let go of her hand. She hid her face in shame once. But now she walked proudly, beside the cowboy who had rescued her heart. The cabin sat quiet beneath a stretch of soft gray sky, the kind that held rain but never made a fuss about it. Fara stood at the edge of the field, apron damp with dew, her hands buried in the earth as she worked a row of late beans. Quillan leaned against the barn door, watching her in stillness. She had not spoken much since their ride back from Crestfield, but something in the way she moved more deliberate now, less guarded, told him what words hadn't. When she stood, brushing soil from her palms, he said, You got a feel for the land. I never had one to tend before, she replied, glancing his way. You do now. She nodded, then turned toward the shed. That fence near the creek, one of the rails is loose. I noticed, he said. Reckon we can fix it before the rain sets in. He followed her down the slope, boots pressing soft into the mossy trail. The fence leaned where the frost had lifted the posts, and one rail hung by a single peg. Fara crouched, examining it. Was this yours? She asked. Or was it here when you came? Built it myself. Took a whole season, working between calving and hauling timber. She slid the rail from its place, careful not to splinter it. You always work alone? Until now. Fara looked up at him. You're not afraid of quiet. Never saw the point in filling it just to hear my own voice. She smiled small but sure and set the rail aside. I used to talk too much. When I was little, I'd chatter so hard my mama would send me outside just to give her ears a rest. He handed her a hammer. You stopped. She nodded. By the time I was 12, I'd learned it was better to keep things to myself. Quillan didn't answer. He just held the post steady while she drove the peg in firm. That evening, the rain finally came, a slow, steady patter on the roof. Inside, Fara stood by the window, watching the trees bend and sway. Her hair was still damp from the creek, rolled into a loose knot. You ever think about building something bigger? She asked, voice quiet. Quillan added another log to the fire. Bigger how? Room enough for 2 beds. Maybe a loft. A place that could hold more than one story. He glanced at her, and she turned from the window to meet his eye. I'm not saying I need anything, she said. Only I've never had a home that didn't belong to someone else. I've been thinking about that too, he said after a moment. She crossed the room slowly, then sat across from him, legs tucked under her. When I was hiding in the woods, I kept thinking about a kitchen. He raised a brow. Not a big one, just a stove, a table, and a place for herbs. I dry them in rows, maybe even grow some out back. I don't know why that's what saved me, but it was. Because it's real, he said. It's something you can shape with your own hands. Fara traced a finger along the edge of the chair. I want a life that's quiet, one where I don't have to look over my shoulder. You've got that here. Her voice dropped. Do I have you here? Quillan didn't answer right away. He stood, crossed the room, and knelt before her. Fara, you saved me too. I didn't know how much until you walked into that clearing. But if you want a kitchen, or a loft, or a life that's all yours, I want to build it with you. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. I ain't leaving, he said. Not now. Not ever. She took his hand and pressed it to her cheek, the same one that once bore a scar. It had faded now, nearly vanished, but he remembered it. He remembered everything. Outside, the rain softened to mist. Fara whispered, Then let's start tomorrow. And Quillan, steady as the ridge behind them, answered, We already have. The first frost stitched silver threads through the tall grass behind the cabin, and the creek had slowed to a quiet trickle beneath its thin coat of ice. Fara stood at the work table Quillan had built beside the hearth, working dough into a dense circle with the heel of her hand. Her sleeves were rolled, her cheeks pink from the cold that lingered even indoors. She glanced up when Quillan ducked in through the door, shaking snow from his hat. You see the heifer limping? She asked, brushing flour from her fingers. Front left leg, he said, setting his gloves on the ledge above the fire. Caught it in a rock bed. Not broke, just sore. I'll wrap it tomorrow. Fara nodded, then returned to her work, pressing her thumb along the edge of the crust. You've got a way with your hands, he said, watching her. I was taught early, she replied. My father believed every girl should know how to feed a household before she turned 15. Quillan stepped closer, picking up a small chipped plate from the shelf. What else did he teach you? She paused, eyes on the dough. How to read a man's silence, how to judge a room before stepping into it, and how to keep your chin up even when the ground's been pulled out from under you. Quillan set the plate down gently. Sounds like he taught you to survive. A small breath left her. He died when I was 17. After that, there wasn't much left but surviving. He reached for the kettle, poured water into the tin cups they kept by the fire. And now, she met his gaze. Now I want to do more than survive. Quillan handed her a cup. Their fingers brushed, but neither pulled away. That night, they sat side by side at the table, the wind pressing against the walls in low sighs. Fara watched the firelight move across the wood grain of the table. I've been thinking, she said, about offering stitches to the women in the valley. Mending mostly. Maybe even teaching some of the younger girls if their folks allow it. Quillan didn't hesitate. It's your time. Your hands. You ought to do with them what you please. I don't want to bring trouble to your door. He looked at her then. This is your door too. The words settled into the room like a stone dropped into still water. Fara set her cup down. I never thought I'd be wanted anywhere. Not after Cressfield. Even now, I keep waiting for someone to say I don't belong. You belong here, he said. With me. She reached across the table, took his hand. Her grip was firm, warm from the fire. I want to be useful, she said. Not just to you. To the land. To the people who need something mended. You don't have to prove yourself, he said quietly. I'm not trying to prove anything, she replied, voice steady. I'm trying to become someone I recognize. In the weeks that followed, Fara walked the valley trails alone, basket on her arm, calling at cabins scattered through the hills. She never went where she wasn't asked, never stayed longer than welcome. She stitched torn cuffs, patched blankets, showed a boy of 9 how to thread a needle without pricking his thumb. The women watched her closely at first, but suspicion softened into nods of thanks, then into offers of warm cider or a place to rest her feet. One morning, she returned with a bundle of worn muslin and a handful of cornmeal biscuits wrapped in a checkered cloth. Quillan opened the door before she reached it. You take the long way around today? He asked. I stopped by the Farron place. Their youngest fell into the well last month. Broke his leg, but he's healing. He took her basket and set it beside the hearth. You've been walking near every day. You need to rest. I don't feel tired, she said, unwinding her shawl. I feel, she paused, then smiled. Like I'm standing up straight for the first time in years. Later that evening, while the stew simmered low and the light outside turned to ash, Quillan took a folded sheet of parchment from his coat. I registered the land in both our names, he said, sliding it across the table. Fara stared at it, then looked up slowly. You did that without asking. I did it because you shouldn't have to ask, he said. This is your place. You deserve it written in ink. She rose from her chair, stepped around the table, and stood in front of him. You trust me that much? He met her eyes. I trust you with my land, with my home, with everything I've got. Fara reached up, touched his jaw. Then I reckon I want to build that kitchen after all. He smiled, quiet and sure, and drew her in. When the snows came in full, they worked side by side beneath the eaves of the new addition. She laid out the shelving with chalk lines while he sawed the boards that would frame her pantry. It wasn't grand, but it was theirs. Each nail, each beam, a promise spoken without words. And on a clear morning in early spring, when the crocuses pushed through the thawed earth and the creek ran free again, Fara stood at the edge of the field, apron full of herbs, and watched Quillan walk toward her, sleeves rolled, the sun behind him. She met him halfway. I never thought I'd be brave again, she said. You were always brave, he said, brushing her brow with his thumb. You just needed to be seen. Fara looked out across the ridge, the wind lifting her hair. I'm not hiding anymore. You never have to, he said. She took his hand, and they walked back to the cabin, two people who'd found each other in the quiet, built something lasting in the silence, and knew, for the first time, they were home. By mid-May, the soil warmed enough for planting, and Quillan turned rows at the back edge of the clearing where the tree line cut shadows across the field. Fara worked ahead of him, barefoot in the loam, her skirts pinned up, dropping seeds into the shallow furrows. She moved with quiet purpose, sleeves rolled to the elbow, the back of her neck damp with sun and effort. You ever planted squash before? Quillan asked, pausing to wipe his brow with a kerchief. Only in window boxes back east, she said. the kind that never got more than a thumb long before frost took them. He glanced at the sky. You'll have better luck here. Earth's richer. She nodded, pressing in the seeds. I can feel it. There's weight to it. The wind stirred the trees behind them, and a hawk circled high over the ridge. Fara straightened, pressing her hand into her lower back. I met a woman last week near the crossing. Widow with 3 boys. Her middle son's been walking the fence line barefoot. Quillan leaned on the handle of the plow. They from down the valley? She said her husband died driving timber last fall. The older boys work a trapline, but she's barely holding their place together. Fara brushed dirt from her palms. I'd like to bring them some of the harvest come autumn. Maybe mend a few shirts while I'm there. Quillan nodded, slow and certain. Whatever you want to give, we'll give it. That evening, Fara hung damp linens from the line strung between the porch posts. The light turned amber through the trees, and the scent of pine resin thickened with the cooling air. She paused when she heard hoofbeats, low and steady, coming up the trail. A man approached on horseback, his hat pulled low, a rifle holstered across his saddle. His boots, stirrup worn and cracked, marked him as someone who'd ridden hard and long without much rest. Fara stepped back, her fingers tightening around the clothespin in her hand. Quillan stepped out of the barn, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He saw the rider and stepped forward, planting his stance between the cabin and the trail. You looking for someone? Quillan asked. The rider dismounted, slow and cautious. Name's Lyle Hart. I work out of the sheriff's office up in Darrow. Heard word a woman by the name of Fara Nells had shown up out this way. Fara stepped forward then, voice steady. That's me. Lyle took off his hat, holding it to his chest. You're not in trouble, ma'am. I just come with news. There was a man in Crestfield came forward last month. Said he knew what really happened the night you left. Your name was cleared by the circuit judge last week. Fara didn't speak at first. She looked down at her bare feet, then back at the man. Why should I care what their judge thinks now? You might not, Lyle said, but I figured you had a right to know. Folks talk in that town like nothing ever touched them. Thought maybe hearing it out loud might help. She nodded once. Thank you for riding all this way. The lawman tipped his hat again. You need anything from the office, you send word. Then he mounted and turned back down the trail. After he disappeared into the trees, Quillan stepped beside her. You all right? She let out a breath, long and slow. I thought I'd feel something, that it would matter. And it doesn't? She shook her head. Not in the way I thought. I already made peace with the truth. I don't need theirs. She gathered the last of the linens, folding them over her arm. I want a wedding dress. Simple. White muslin, nothing fancy, but stitched by my own hand. Quillan's brow lifted. You want to marry me? She looked up at him, steady and sure. I've wanted to since the day you took my hand and walked me into town like I wasn't something to be hidden. He stepped in, close enough for her to rest her head against his chest. Then let's make it right. They married before the first hay cut, beneath the cottonwood tree behind the cabin. No preacher, just a promise spoken from one heart to another, and a ring of braided horsehair he'd made with his own hands. Fara wore the dress she'd sewn at twilight, a ribbon tied through her braid. Quillan wore the same shirt he'd worn the night she first stepped into his cabin, but the sleeves were patched now, and the collar mended with one of her careful stitches. After, they danced barefoot in the grass while the stars came out one by one. No music but the river and the night birds, no guests but the trees. When they lay together that night, she reached for him with no hesitation, her hands sure, her breath soft against his shoulder. He touched her like she was something sacred, not fragile, but earned. And when she slept, curled into him with her back warm against his chest, he whispered, You are not what they called you. You never were. In the dark, she smiled. Not because she needed the words, but because they were true. She had walked through fire and shame, and come out the other side with her head high and her name her own. And beside her lay the man who had seen her whole from the start. From that day forward, they moved through the world as one. Not because they needed to survive it, but because they had chosen to live it together. By the time late summer dust settled into the joints of the porch boards and the hayloft stood stacked to the rafters, the cabin had taken on the feel of a lived-in place. Not just shelter, but home. The kitchen Quillan built with his own hands bore the marks of use. Flour dust in the corners, a dried bundle of rosemary hanging crooked beside the window, and a narrow drawer that stuck unless handled just right. Fara never minded. She called it a drawer with a temperament and learned to coax it open with a practiced touch. One afternoon, she walked back from the lower pasture with a basket of early apples and a small blue bundle tucked beneath her arm. Quillan leaned against the side of the barn, wiping oil from a wrench. She set the basket beside him and held out the bundle. He took it, unfolded the cloth, and stared. Inside was a folded book of names, stitched neatly along the edge with red thread. The first page read, Land of West, Season 1. I thought we ought to keep record, she said, of the days, the plantings, anything worth remembering. Quillan flipped through the pages. You wrote about the calf born in the storm, and how you fixed the wheelbarrow using a bootstrap and 2 strips of tin, she said. He nodded slowly, fingers lingering on the pages. Feels strange, seeing it written down. I don't want to forget, she said. And someday, if we're gone, I want someone to know we were here, that this was ours. He looked up. You're thinking beyond us. I think I always have, she said. Even when I was alone. I just didn't have anything worth thinking forward to. He folded the book carefully and handed it back. We'll fill it page by page. That evening, Quillan brought in a box fashioned from pine, the edges sanded smooth. He placed it on the table. Fara opened the lid and found inside a bundle of letters, each sealed with wax. I wrote them before we married, he said. Didn't know if I'd ever give them to you. Some were written before I even knew your name. She looked up. Why? Because I needed to say things I wasn't ready to speak, he said. I didn't know what kind of life we'd have. I just knew I wanted one with you. Fara didn't open them. She pressed her palm to the lid. I'll keep them for when I need reminding. Weeks passed. The first maple leaves began to turn, and the air at dawn carried the sharp edge of the season coming. Fara stood in the doorway one morning, watching the fog lift off the valley. She turned to Quillan, who was lacing his boots. I had a dream last night, she said, that I was back in Cressfield, that I was alone again. He paused, waiting. But I wasn't afraid, she said. I walked through the streets and no one looked at me. I was just a woman with her head high. That's because you are, he said. Even in your sleep, you know it now. She crossed the room and leaned her forehead against his. When you met me, I didn't think I could be anything more than the worst thing that had happened to me. And now, I know better, she whispered, because you saw me whole. That winter, they hosted 4 families from the valley for a harvest supper. Fara made stew from venison Quillan had brought down at the edge of the low woods. She set the table with mismatched plates, and the Farren boys arrived with a tin of apple preserves that had burst in the cold. No one cared. They ate, laughed, and when the wind howled, Quillan lit a second lamp and told the story of the time he'd been chased halfway up a tree by a bull elk with a taste for turnips. When the guests were gone and the cabin quiet again, Fara tucked the apple tin on the shelf above the stove. It's cracked, Quillan said. I know, she said, but it held something sweet. In the spring that followed, Fara began teaching 2 girls from the Farren homestead in the early afternoons. She cleared a corner of the cabin, set up a small desk, and used scraps of muslin to teach them letters. Quillan worked the fields and came home to find the girls reciting lines from scripture while Fara mended their mittens. He watched her from the doorway one evening, her head bent low, the girls listening intently as she read aloud. Her voice carried the rhythm of someone who knew how words could heal. That night, she curled beside him in bed, her breath steady. "You ever miss the way it was before?" she asked. He brushed her hair back from her cheek. "No, because I didn't know it could be like this." She looked at him, eyes soft in the dark. "I'm still learning that love doesn't always come in thunder. Sometimes it comes in fence rails and boiled coffee," he said. She laughed, quiet, and in broken tins and stubborn drawers. They held each other as the wind moved soft across the roof, and the world outside settled. Years passed like that, slow and steady. The garden grew, the girls learned their letters, and the record book filled with births, storms, and small joys. They added a second room when the need came, though it sat empty except for visiting children and the occasional traveler needing rest. Fara grew older, her hair streaked with silver, her hands lined from work. Quillan's back stiffened in the mornings, but his hands remained sure. They walked the edge of the field each evening, and when they sat side by side on the porch, her head resting against his shoulder, neither spoke. They didn't need to. Their life was not made of grand things, but it was made of good ones. And when the final page of the record book was filled, and the last season noted, they placed it in the pine box beside the letters she never had to open, because she lived every word of them. Together, they had made a life that stood in full against the wind, and when they looked out across the land they had built with their hands and their love, they saw not what had been lost, but everything that had been found.